What is going on, everyone? My name is Wesley Shoemaker, joined by Keenan Cummings on the WVSports.com podcast. Today is the beginning of the football year in the 2024 season for West Virginia, as they are a month away from kickoff against Penn State. And with that came the first press conference of the fall for head coach Neil Brown. So, Keenan, let's start with you here. First off, how you doing on this lovely Wednesday now that football season's here and fresh off vacation? And what were some of your main takeaways from Neil Brown's press conference this afternoon?
Yeah, rested up and relaxed. I definitely am that. Took a real vacation. I know that sounds weird, but in our profession, you don't usually get those. Tried to stay away from my phone. Couldn't do it the whole time. I'm not going to sit here and lie to you, but I did try to do that. Had a nice tan. Got a few comments on it by the other media members. So feeling pretty good. I thought today was pretty interesting. It really was. If you know Neil, it's pretty cut and dry. I do like how he's pretty straightforward. In his opening comments, he kind of hit on some of the questions I had. Even before it started, I looked over at some of the media members and said, "Are you going to ask this or me?" Because you need to know some injury updates, personnel updates, and I thought that was interesting. Of course, we have a full list of all that on the site, over at WVSports.com if you want to check it out. But biggest news to me, C.J. Donaldson's full participation, Jaheim Joseph, Cole Taylor, all those guys are full participation, which in the spring they were limited or barely practiced at all. A couple not really surprises, as we've reported over the last, I think it's about the last month, Kyle Altuner has been injured and will miss a portion of the season, which is good news because we had feared that, it might have been a season-long ending. Corey McIntyre, the same thing, lower leg injury. He's going to be out until later in the year, which, again, is better news than I expected because I thought that might have been a season-ending injury. So those are positives, but I thought maybe the most positive news we heard today on the injury front is the fact that Jacoby Spells has done really well in his rehab and was a limited participant today. There was a lot of talk that he might miss all of fall camp and some of the season. So if they can get him back to what they've already added in the cornerback room, that'd be pretty good.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, as you said, C.J. Donaldson and Cole Taylor being back, that's huge. Obviously, I don't think any of us really expected them to be limited, but just the reassurance that they are full go and good to go is a good thing. And then obviously you had the two names, Njai Favris and Maurice Hamilton, that are going to be out and are no longer on the active roster. And I think sucks for them, sucks for those guys. I know Jai Favris was a big part on special teams, especially the last couple of years. He had a season-ending injury a year ago, and it just, for the both of them, seems like neither of them could fully get back to the place they wanted to be at. And so hope for the best for them. And obviously, in the short term, it takes two bodies away, but in the long term, I'm not sure it really impacts anything significant for this team. But moving on from the injury front, if you will, Keenan, just one thing that stood out to me, and if you want to add on, is Neil Brown kind of really talking about the work that Mike Joseph has done, as well as the nutrition staff. I think they've definitely in past years realized how technology and things. I know one thing on special teams on the field, but I think this off the field focus is something that is really crucial, especially when you're having all these things that are new access-wise as far as nutrition and health and standards that go, and trying to build a roster that is physically stands out to other teams. And I think it starts with the nutrition. What do you think of that?
I think it says a lot about Neil as a head coach. He kind of admitted that. He's realized over, his 6 years here in Morgantown that he doesn't need to be as hands-on. He needs to focus on his strengths and what he needs to do, take it back away a little bit, take a step back. And he's done that. He's kind of let those departments run what they do. And at the same time being, staying abreast, being informed of what's going on. And that takes some maturity. It's kind of like we saw in the past with play calling and some other things that, as you develop as a head coach, you learn how to do things differently. And I think it was telling that, he said he had been, in coaching, I think it was 22 years, to be his 22nd year, and a head coach 10 years. And this is the most excited he's ever been. And part of that reason is he has a competitive, I guess is the word you want to use, looking Power 4 team. And by that, I mean, if you've covered this team, which you have, Wes, for a while, some of those teams when he first took over, you could see that the line of scrimmage was going to be an issue. You know, they had bodies, they had guys that could be potentially good, but they weren't developed, they weren't ready to go. And I think that that's where the major difference is. And then something that I've noticed every year for the past several years is the secondary. They're longer, they're faster, they're bigger, and that's where they have to be if they want to be able to successfully compete in a league like the Big 12. And I think that you're starting to see the physical catch up to kind of where the coaching was at, which you do that and you start to get a little bit of a dangerous combination.
Yeah, I think starting with the line of scrimmage there, I feel like last summer is when Neil really got into this belief and understanding that West Virginia finally has what it takes to be where it needs to be on both sides of the ball at the line of scrimmage. And I think you kind of saw that play out. They were one of the best teams on the defensive line in terms of sacks. Obviously, everyone knows what the offensive line did, and that production speaks for itself. So I think that was a semi-turning point for Neil, as it was year 5, and you finally got to have not only the bodies, but the coaching and development behind both of those units. And obviously the offensive line returns a few starters there, same with the defensive line. And so you have that expertise there, and you have that physicality that you just, as you said, didn't have at the beginning. And that adds another layer, especially when I think, as we saw last year, that physicality was different for some of those newcomers in the league. And as this league expands and goes to the West Coast, and you're going to have to adjust to different play styles and the way teams play differently, physicality is never a bad thing. And then onto the secondary point, I do think that in the past years they've started to recruit better in this terms of that they're getting the bodies they want. I feel like early on it was they either can get size or speed, but not both. And I think now we're finally seeing them get both and then being able to develop them as well.
We're going to see if it plays out on the field, Wes, but just on paper, you know, you watch these guys' tapes, you see their production. This is as versatile of a secondary group as they've had under maybe 2020. You'd have an argument, but they legitimately have guys that can move around, play different safety spots, you know, play different sides at cornerback, play nickel. You know, they have not really had that. When they've had injuries, they've had to plug holes with guys that weren't necessarily equipped to fill those holes. And you've seen teams exploit it. You know, Oklahoma last year had a field day with it. So I think that will be something really exciting to watch in fall camp. I don't know how much we'll get to see, but, you know, just to kind of keep an eye on, you know, if it meets the expectations. You know, if this group, they invested heavily in the transfer portal when it comes to filling holes there. And we're going to see if that pays off, because if it does, this defense has a chance to be much improved. You know, it probably surprised some people last year overall, given what was returning. But they have much higher aspirations if they want to try to compete for a Big 12 title.
I also think for me, at least, I know towards the end of last season, we saw a lot of the same guys getting the bulk of the snaps. And it was a little bit of, when we hit November, are these guys going to get worn out? And you want to be playing your best football in November. And with a team like West Virginia, who thinks they can get to Dallas and thinks they can be playing late in the season, you have to have that depth in the secondary if you're going to want to actually play meaningful football at that time of year. And with the way just even the playoff works and all of that, with a lengthened season in general going forward for college football teams, depth, especially in places where we saw last year, it was kind of the starters are bust at times in the secondary. I think that's going to be really crucial.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think that it's always critical, and not just there. I mean, across the board. You know, this is the first time that West Virginia's had real linebacker depth. I don't remember the last time West Virginia's had 5 inside linebackers that they can depend on. You know, look at the edge guys. You know, they've got two, maybe even 3 guys on the edge that they can rely on, which has not been the case. You know, they have not had a Tyron Bradley, a Ty French, you know, guys like that they can depend on the edge. You know, there was a few years ago, they were trying to play inside linebackers at that Bandit, now Spur spot. And it just doesn't work. You've got to recruit, you got to develop there. And I think that sometimes that's hard to really realize. And that's a lot of the struggles with the offensive line. You know, I've talked about this on the message board, you know, with some of our members. Matt Moore just didn't suddenly figure out how to coach offensive line again. You know, he's got depth, he's got talent, and it's developed over time. And sometimes that takes time and it's frustrating. I understand that, but that's where you have to get if you want to be able to compete as a program. And I think that once West Virginia figured out retention and some of those elements that were hurting the program, then we're able to keep some of these guys and really develop them and keep a lot of the staff together. I think now you're starting to see the fruits of that labor.
Before we get into our biggest question marks of fall camp and what we're looking for, one more thing that stood out to me from Neil is how he felt West Virginia was in a good spot no matter what. And I think that one thing that Neil's done really well is embrace the tradition of West Virginia football and what it means, and kind of fully go all in terms of he's embracing everything that is around WVU, the traditions and the game day and all of it. And I think it's cool as the Big 12 expands that he realizes the importance of what West Virginia football is, not only to the state, but just as a brand in general.
Yeah, I think you can say a lot of things about the first 4 years, really. I think very few people would have complaints about last year, but the first 4 years of Neil Brown's tenure. But he has always been very cognizant of the history here, of the tradition, and the success. And I think that he's said multiple times, they haven't lived up to that success. And you look at the teams in the Big 12 now, and historically, West Virginia stacks up right up there at the top. And they're kind of one of those teams that people forget about at times, that they have been that successful over the years. And that's what he's kind of reminding people, hey, we're here. And he said that, West Virginia, the common theme is they've always had success in every conference they've been in. Really kind of sans the Big 12, but they're hoping to change that soon. And I think that if they are able to change that, the program right now is on upward trajectory, and you tack on another 8, 9, 10 win season on what you did last year, you're going to be cooking with gas.
Moving on now, let's talk about question marks and what we are curious about entering fall camp. So I'll let you go first with just your first thing that you want to learn as over the next month as West Virginia heads into the 2024 season.
Well, we've talked a lot about the wide receivers and their potential. I want to see it play out. I want to see them actually live up to that potential. I think you saw it at times last year, but even Neil touched on it today. Teams were able to kind of make West Virginia try to throw the ball and make their wide receivers win in one-on-one situations. If they're able to do that, you have an offense that was able to effectively run the ball. They were the number one team in number one Power 4 team in the country last year in rushing. That is nothing to sneeze about. I mean, that's quite the accomplishment. You're able to stretch the field vertically and horizontally. That makes it very difficult. Now, some of that's Garrett Green. He's got to get better in the intermediate, but the wide receivers have to win. And I know that everyone's excited about them, and there's reason to be. There's a lot of guys that have potential in that room. There's a lot of reasons to be excited. But I want to see it play out. Secondary is the low-hanging fruit. I could have picked them. We already talked about them, though. I think that everyone knows that. That's position's got to prove itself. But on offense, for me, it really does come down to the wide receiver group. I think that I trust the direction on the offensive line, who they got there filling in for guys they lost last year. You don't replace Zach Frazier. I want to see it play out at wide receiver.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. Like, we hear all about this, what they learned and how they were kind of overwhelmed in a sense early on as freshmen, just as kind of any kid who gets on campus is. But I think now that they have that full year of development, that full 12 months to figure out their roles, figure out what works, what doesn't, and just kind of be on campus and be under the instruction of the Mountaineer coaching staff. Like, I think it's easy to say, oh, this guy can get a lot better when we first get him on campus, but now it's about seeing guys like Rodney Gallagher, Hudson Clement, Traylon Ray, especially, like, how can they improve under a full calendar year of development. And so I think with the wide receiver room too, and that there's going to be guys like Jaden Bright, like, he's going to challenge some people here in terms of playing time. And I think competition's good, especially in that room, because you're going to have guys step up, especially as you talked about. Everyone knows West Virginia wants to run the ball. And so if you can start keying in and focusing on the run, because the guys on the outside aren't going to beat you in the pass game, then it's going to turn afternoons into some pretty long afternoons for the Mountaineers.
Yeah, I mean, that it really boils down to that. If this team is able to effectively throw the football, especially in the intermediate, but if they're able to win on the outside, effectively throw the football on top of what they're able to do in the run game, good luck trying to stop it, especially with the fact that you got a quarterback that's mobile. And, Neil has not stopped talking about, what Garrett can be. He can be special. He can be a difference maker, and he's really going to have a chance to prove that this fall.
One thing for me that I'm kind of curious and looking into as fall camp progresses is the linebacker room. You touched on it briefly there earlier, how there's a lot of depth in this room, but I think there's a difference between depth and talent. One guy, Josiah Trotter, right? We've heard his name for a while now, and obviously he had the tough injury break last year, and so now it's finally his turn to kind of elevate. And going back to the physicality and looking the part, he certainly looks the part,
Yeah.
but I want to see how he does on the field, as well as some other guys like Ben Cutter, Reed Carricker. Like, how do these guys fit in either from the portal or, as we just talked about with the receivers, making that jump from year one to year two?
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think you could make a strong argument for the defensive line too. I don't feel bad about it. I think that would be unfair to say. I felt a lot better when Corey McIntyre was healthy. All I heard was good things about how he was progressing, how he was going to make an impact. But you get a Sonny Redwood back, you get some other guys back. So I necessarily don't think there's one position outside the secondary that I would be worried about. But I do think that, if some of these young guys develop, if some of these guys hit that we've been talking about, you might legitimately, the word depth is usually a dirty word, this time of the year, because, everybody says they have depth in fall camp. Then you get into the season and it boils down to your playing, like you were saying earlier, the same 5-6 guys at a position. So if they can develop some true depth, I think that this defense has a real chance to make a big step. And if they make a big step, on top of what everyone expects the offense to make a big step, maybe some of those predictions people have out there, up in the win total aren't so crazy after all.
Yeah, I fully agree. And then transitioning to the other side of it, as we say with the offense, needing to take a step forward, we've got to just look at Garrett Green's accuracy, plain and simple, right? If everyone wants this offense and expects this offense to be better, it starts and ends with how he can throw the ball, because if he's effective and he can convert on those short and intermediate passes and be better than where he was last year, then okay, there's something that's really going well on the offensive end. But all we've heard from December on is accuracy, 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 make the layups, make the layups, make the layups with him. And so I will be interested to see if that was all smoke and if that's just something that he isn't great at, or if he truly was able to develop that into his game heading into the fall.
Yeah, it's a must. It's going to have to happen if West Virginia offense truly, he did what he did last year. This is what's impressive about this. He only completed 53% of his passes, and he was actually very accurate accurate for the most part, throwing down the field. It was that intermediate to mid-level where he struggled, and if he's able to connect on some of those, man, this offense has a chance to be special. I do agree with Neil. If that comes together, and you can tell that it's been a focus, it's been an effort, a 3-pronged approach is what they said in the spring. They spent a lot of time working with the quarterback coach that he's worked with for a while. They've worked with Neil in conjunction with the staff, so it'll be really exciting to see what everything looks like. We're going to get some glimpses in fall camp, but you know how that goes. We're just going to get a little peek behind the curtain. It'll be really exciting to see how this thing comes together in time for the Penn State game. And what a game to find out. Probably a top 10 team. Almost surely a top 10 team coming to Morgantown. So,
yeah, there's no sneaking into this thing. We'll find out by 1:30 p.m. Eastern time on August 31st, right? Whether this has been like, if this worked. And I think you're kind of, if you're West Virginia, like you're betting on him. You're betting on Garrett Green. You're betting on his development, because we saw really good glimpses of him. I mean, on the ground, that I don't think anything needs to change there, because he ran the ball crazy well. But through the air, as you say, if he can just get marginally better in a couple spots, that will really change the trajectory of this team. So what's another thing for you that you want to look for here in fall camp?
I think the one thing, I don't know how much we're going to get to see, so I'm kind of a little hesitant to talk about it, but they've got to get better on kickoffs. I mean, that's kickoffs, kicking it, and kickoff returns. And the thing I'm encouraged about is in the spring, they spend a lot of time working drills specifically toward that. It's a focus. The coaches know it. The players know it. It's no secret. It was a big struggle area last year. That starts with getting the ball in the end zone, trying to get some touchbacks, and then trying to generate some return yardage. I think that of all the areas, with special teams, everything's pretty shored up except there. And if West Virginia is able to find a way to address that, be effective there, then they're going to make leaps and bounds, in terms of just starting field position. on each side of the ball.
Yeah, I think obviously late in the year in that Baylor game, right? We were like, oh,
Nightmare.
there's the problem, and I think it was never addressed really last year. Like you saw, oh, great at times where they're making, especially I think kickoffs when West Virginia's kicking the ball, it was more of a problem. I would say just because teams seem to easily return kicks, and I don't know if that's a schematic thing, if that's a personnel
Injuries
thing.
didn't help too.
Right, but it's just a matter of there's no going around it. You either are going to have to figure a way to get the ball through the end zone if you're Michael Hayes, or you're going to have to figure out a way to defend it if you're not kicking it consistently into the end zone. And field position's a real thing, momentum's a real thing, and those are two things that can be generated instantaneously with a kickoff return.
Yeah, I mean, that Baylor game is – you can just hang that on, I guess, in the Hall of Shame if you want, as an example of how kickoffs can change games around. West Virginia had that game probably put away twice and kept letting them back in it. And I think that it's an area that's been a struggle. And to their credit, I have to say this, they fixed punting, on both sides, punt return and punting. So if they can do that, I believe that they'll be able to correct kickoffs. So we'll see, but that's an area, if we get to see any, I'll be paying attention to.
One last thing for me is just figuring out the rotations on offensive line. I think that you have kind of your 5 starters more or less going in, but just to see how things develop on the offensive line, I think that also just to see how Xavier Bosley might push Nick Malone, that's one thing. And overall, just seeing how Brandon Yates handles the center position. We saw a little bit of it in the bowl game last year, but it's obviously not Zach Frazier, and I don't think you can compare anything to Zach Frazier just because of the level he played at, but it's a new center and the same offense, and the expectation level doesn't change just because the player changes, and so that'll be interesting to see how he does at the center position as well.
You're right. I would be more concerned had we not seen it a little bit last year, especially how he came in the Baylor game, the way he finished that, and then played against North Carolina. It's kind of like Fatorma Mulba on the other side, how well he played, in the bowl game. So, but you're right. I mean, you need to find out. And one game, the good news for West Virginia is Yates has experience. He has played a lot in the past, maybe not at center, but other spots. So you're not throwing in somebody that's green. He's played a lot, but he's going to have to, you're not going to be Zach Frazier. No one's asking you to be Zach Frazier. Just be the best version of Brandon Yates.
Yeah, I also think to that point, we've heard so much about this cross training in the past few years in spring ball, especially how Matt Moore and Neil Brown want to have all these offensive linemen work at different positions. I think this is where some of that can pay off. Of Brandon Yates, we didn't just start doing this with him last year. He's been doing this for a couple of years on the side, obviously, and now it's time for all of that to kind of come together.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be exciting, man. It's just exciting to be talking football again and not rehashing stuff from the spring, talking about some new stuff. And we'll be bringing a lot more of this to you. We're going to try to regularly do this. Pretty much if West Virginia has a media day, anything happens, we will be here to deliver you information. We invite you to come check out our website, WVSports.com. Got Wesley on board now helping me out, and Vernon as well. So we'll have a lot of content for you. Not just football. We do basketball. We do recruiting. We touch all gamuts of West Virginia athletics. So we do welcome you to watch this. We're investing in it. We're going to put a lot of time into this and try to make this a really productive and informative show for you all that enjoy West Virginia sports.
Yeah, please don't judge us too hard. This was number 1. So number 2, hopefully coming you maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after. I know there is an open practice availability and Keenan will be there, boots on the ground. So this was the WVSports.com podcast presented by the Rivals Network. For Keenan Cummings, I am Wesley Shoemaker. Thank you for watching.